Noah had never been the kind of boy people noticed. At 18, just a few weeks into his first semester of university, he already carried himself with the quiet, cautious steps of someone who belonged more to the library than to the noise of a sports court. His friend from high school, the few he still kept in touch with, had joked that he was the guy who always hid behind books. It wasn't an insult exactly, more like an observation of the role he had unconsciously accepted. Books were predictable. They didn't laugh when you stumbled, didn't glare if you failed, didn't ask you to prove anything. But Noah, despite his nature, had promised himself that university would be different. He would step outside of his protective circle of silence and give himself a chance to try something new. That promise is what brought him into the echoing university gym that afternoon, a space filled with the heavy thud of basketballs hitting polished wood and the squeak of sneakers against the floor. It wasn't just a gym, it was the territory of the university's basketball team. For Noah, even the idea of being there was terrifying, but the fear carried a strange pull. He had signed up for the basketball section not because he thought he was good at it, far from it, but because he wanted to feel what it was like to run, to play, to belong to something that wasn't made of ink and paper. From the first step inside, he felt like an intruder. The ceiling seemed higher than it should have been, the banners of past victories hanging like reminders that greatness belonged to others, not to him. Around the court, the players were already warming up, their movements fluid, confident, natural. They called to each other with ease, voices loud, laughter sharp, bodies moving in sync as though the game itself was a language only they could speak. Noah clutched the strap of his sports bag tighter, trying to make himself smaller, hoping no one would notice how out of place he was. But someone did. Connor. At 20, he wasn't just another player. He was the captain of the team, the one whose face already appeared on university posters, whose name everyone seemed to know. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that careless charisma that drew people in before he even spoke, Connor was the kind of person who seemed born for the spotlight. Every laugh, every gesture, every word carried weight because people wanted to copy him, wanted to orbit around him. If the court was a kingdom, Connor was its king, and everyone else followed his lead. It didn't take long for his eyes to land on Noah. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. Noah's nervous shuffle, his slightly hunched posture, the way he held the ball like it might explode in his hands at any moment. Connor's grin appeared almost instantly, wide and sharp, like a predator catching sight of easy prey. Well, Connor's voice carried easily across the gym, pitched just loud enough to cut through the bounce of the balls and the squeak of sneakers. What do we have here? Lost your way to the library, freshman? The players nearest to him laughed. It wasn't cruel in itself, at least not yet, but it had that edge, that expectation that more was coming, and everyone leaned in to watch. Noah's chest tightened. He had expected stares, maybe whispers, but not this. Not the spotlight of the captain himself. He tried to ignore it, lowering his head and moving toward the rack of spare basketballs near the wall. His hand shook slightly as he reached for one, though he forced himself to grip it tighter, as if sheer pressure might hide his trembling. He wasn't going to run. Not on his first day. Not when he had promised himself he would try. But Connor wasn't finished. Careful with that ball, Connor called again, strolling closer, his grin widening as the others began to turn toward them. Don't strain yourself. Those things are heavier than your textbooks, you know. Laughter rippled across the court, sharper this time, carrying the sting of amusement at Noah's expense. He felt the heat rising to his face, his skin burning under their stares. Still, he forced himself to step onto the court, bouncing the ball once, then twice. The sound was too loud, too hollow, like the floor itself was mocking him. His first dribble veered slightly off, and he scrambled to steady it, his movements awkward, uncertain. Connor tilted his head, studying him, the smile never leaving his face. Tell me, freshman, you sure you know which way the hoop is? Or do you need me to draw you a map? Another round of laughter broke out. Even players who hadn't been paying attention before now turned to watch. Noah's throat felt dry, words gathering but refusing to come out. He wasn't quick with comebacks, wasn't sharp with sarcasm. His defense had always been silence, and right now, silence felt like a heavy chain around his neck. He dribbled again, slower this time, trying to shut out the noise, try to convince himself that he belonged on the court, even if just barely. But Connor, sensing weakness, stepped closer. His shadow stretched over Noah, his presence impossible to ignore. "This isn't the library, kid," Connor said, his tone casual but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't get points for reading the rulebook. Out here, you gotta actually play. And from where I'm standing, I don't think you're going to last 5 minutes." The words struck harder than Noah expected, each syllable pressing down on the fragile courage he had brought with him. Around them, the other players chuckled, some shaking their heads as though the outcome was already decided. Noah swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the ball. He could feel his pulse hammering in his temples, the noise of the gym collapsing into a blur of laughter and the steady echo of Connor's voice. He wanted to run, to vanish back into the safety of the library, to retreat into words and pages where no one could reach him. But another part of him, small and trembling, refused to give Connor that victory. So he stood there, silent, forcing himself not to flinch, not to drop the ball, not to give the captain exactly what he wanted, proof that he didn't belong. The court held its breath for a moment, tension humming in the air, every eye fixed on him. Connor smirked, as if daring him to make a move, to show whether he would crumble or fight. And Noah, though his body shook, refused to look away. Noah returned to the court the next evening, half expecting that Connor's mocking would only intensify. The words from the day before still clung to him, the laughter of the others replaying in his mind like an echo he could not silence. Yet something stubborn inside him refused to give up. He told himself that even if every dribble was awkward and every movement was a mistake, he would not walk away. He would not let Connor or anyone else decide who belonged here. The court was nearly empty by the time practice ended, the echo of sneakers fading into the distance as players left in pairs and groups, their voices trailing out into the corridor. Noah lingered, fumbling with the ball, repeating the same clumsy dribble over and over, desperate to make his body obey commands it seemed unwilling to learn. And that was when he realized someone was still there. Connor. He hadn't left with the rest of the team. Instead, he leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching. The sight alone sent a chill through Noah, because he couldn't imagine why the captain would waste his time here when the crowd, the noise, and the admiration he thrived on were waiting elsewhere. For a moment, Noah considered leaving, escaping before Connor opened his mouth. But before he could make a move, Connor stepped forward, the grin familiar, yet different somehow. "You bounce like you're scared the ball's going to bite you," Connor said, his tone sharp, but not as cruel as the day before. "Relax. It's not going to run away." Noah blinked, unsure whether this was another joke for his own amusement or something else entirely. But Connor didn't turn away, didn't call the others over to join in the fun. Instead, he stayed close, circling him like a coach pretending not to be one, throwing out comments that stung but carried a strange usefulness. His words were laced with sarcasm, yet behind them was instruction, how to hold the ball, where to place his feet, how to use his shoulders instead of just his arms. Noah followed hesitantly at first, waiting for the trap, waiting for the laughter to come crashing down again. But it didn't. Over the days that followed, the pattern repeated. Noah arrived at practice, endured Connor's jabs in front of the others, and then, when the gym had emptied, found himself cornered into these strange one-on-one sessions. The teasing never disappeared, but it shifted, softened in subtle ways that only Noah seemed to notice. A smirk that carried challenge instead of cruelty. A raised brow that suggested Connor was testing him, not humiliating him. Noah should have hated it. He should have walked away. But there was something magnetic about the way Connor refused to leave him alone. Something that hinted there was more at play than the role of the mocking captain. One night, long after the echoes of the last ball had died and the gym seemed swallowed in half-light, Connor sat on the bleachers, towel draped around his neck, unusually quiet. Noah kept practicing free throws, trying not to notice the silence, until Connor finally spoke. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the bravado that usually filled the space. "You ever wonder why I talk so much?" he asked suddenly, catching Noah off guard. Noah froze, the ball slipping from his hands, bouncing once before rolling away across the court. He turned, searching Connor's face for the smirk, the playful spark, the mask of arrogance. But none of it was there. Connor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the polished floor as though it might offer answers he hadn't found. It's because if I don't, I hear it, the silence, and I can't stand it. Everyone thinks I love being loud, being the guy in the center, the one with the jokes. Truth is, he exhaled, sharp and heavy, dragging a hand across his face. Truth is, I need the noise, because when it stops, it's just me. And that's worse than anything they can throw at me. The word struck Noah harder than any insult ever had. For a moment, he didn't know what to say, caught between disbelief and the raw honesty in Connor's tone. This wasn't the captain of the team, the confident leader, the idol of the court. This was someone stripped bare, frightened of the very thing Noah had always clung to, silence. Noah swallowed, unsure whether to answer. His instinct was to protect himself, to retreat into the quiet he knew best. But Connor's confession lingered in the air, fragile, dangerous, as though it might shatter if left unanswered. For the first time, Noah saw him not as the untouchable leader everyone admired, but as a boy hiding behind laughter, terrified of being forgotten once the noise died down. And in that moment, the balance between them shifted. The captain who mocked him now seemed vulnerable in ways Noah could hardly understand. The boy who had always been invisible suddenly found himself holding a truth more fragile than any ball on the court. Connor's mask had slipped, and Noah realized he wasn't just staring at the king of the team anymore. He was staring at someone human, someone breakable, someone who feared emptiness more than failure. The gym was alive with the usual chaos of practice. The pounding of sneakers against the polished floor, the slap of the ball against hands, the sharp whistles of the assistant coach echoing through the cavernous space. Noah tried to stay focused, his breathing steady as he moved through the drills, but every moment carried the weight of awareness. Connor was nearby. He always was. In front of the team, Connor still played the role everyone expected. The smirking captain, tossing out jokes at Noah's expense, mocking his hesitation or awkward form. But when the noise thinned, when the eyes of the team weren't so heavy, he shifted, his voice dropping, his comments becoming corrections instead of taunts. Noah had begun to rely on those moments, the unspoken proof that behind the arrogance there was something genuine. That fragile balance shattered in a single instant. It happened during a scrimmage, the team divided into two groups, the court filled with frantic movement. Noah, struggling to keep pace, fumbled another pass, his frustration mounting with every mistake. Connor moved toward him, closer than he normally would during practice, his voice low and urgent. Keep your shoulders square, Noah. Use your body, not just your arms. Stop thinking so much, feel it. His hand brushed against Noah's arm as he corrected his stance, guiding him with the same steady precision he had offered in those quiet after-practice sessions. To Noah, it was nothing unusual, almost familiar by now. But to others, to the group of players lingering on the edge of the court, the sight meant something else entirely. A laugh broke through the air, sharp and mocking, carrying farther than it should have. Well, would you look at that? One of the guys called, his voice loud enough to make heads turn. Looks like the captain's got himself a favorite student. The laughter spread quickly, rolling through the gym like a spark through dry leaves. A few players exchanged knowing glances. Others smirked openly, nudging each other as if they had uncovered a secret worth tearing apart. The attention shifted instantly, the game forgotten, and suddenly all eyes were on Connor and Noah. Noah's chest tightened, heat rushing to his face as the sound of the mocking laughter drilled into him. His grip on the ball faltered, the rhythm of the court breaking apart beneath his feet. He turned, searching Connor's face for reassurance, for that flicker of honesty he had seen so many times before in the quiet. But what he found instead was something colder, sharper. Connor's hand dropped from his arm as though burned. His laugh came quick, loud, hollow, slicing through the rising noise of the others. "Don't get the wrong idea," he said, his voice carrying over the court with practiced ease. "I was just showing the rookie how not to embarrass himself out here." His words were rehearsed, every syllable designed to sound effortless, casual, dismissive. But to Noah, they cut deeper than anything else could. The gym erupted with jeers and claps, the kind of laughter that didn't fade but built, echoing off the walls, surrounding them in a storm of ridicule. A few players whistled mockingly. Others threw out jabs Noah couldn't even process, their voices blending into one jagged roar. What should have been just another drill had turned into an arena, and he was standing at the center, exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Noah's throat closed. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to say something that would shatter the humiliation pressing in from every direction. But the words refused to form. The betrayal wasn't in the laughter of the others. It wasn't even in their mocking faces. It was in Connor's. The way his eyes slid past him as though he were no one at all. The boy who had once admitted his fear of silence now drowned Noah in it, choosing the safety of the crowd over the truth they had shared. The weight of that choice was unbearable. Noah could hear the laughter as though it were inside his skull. Every note sharpened, distorted, impossible to escape. His body felt frozen, his hands numb, his chest heavy with the sting of being cast aside. He had braced himself for ridicule from strangers, had even expected that joining the team would mean whispers and laughter at his expense. But he had not prepared for this. Not for the cold rejection of the only person who had let him see behind a mask. As the practice continued, the noise refused to fade. Every dribble of the ball seemed louder, every shout from the coach harsher, every cheer from the sidelines another knife twisting deeper. Noah forced himself through the motions, though he could barely see straight, his body heavy with humiliation. And through it all, Connor didn't look at him again. Not once. He laughed with the others. He played his part as captain, his voice rising above the noise with its usual charisma. But it was empty, and Noah could feel the hollowness like a blade. When the whistle finally blew and the players began to scatter, Noah packed his bag with trembling hands, each zipper a struggle, each movement weighted by the echo of Connor's words. The others had already moved on, their laughter fading into casual chatter as they left the gym. But for Noah, the betrayal lingered, heavy and raw, pressing into his chest with every breath. And he realized then that sometimes betrayal does not come with shouted words or cruel gestures. Sometimes it comes with a laugh that doesn't reach the eyes, spoken loudly enough for everyone else to hear, while the person you trusted most pretends you never mattered at all. The weeks that followed were heavy with silence. Noah stopped going to practice, stopped even walking near the gym. The thought of the laughter that had filled that space, the echo of Connor's voice pretending he was nothing more than a rookie who needed saving, was unbearable. He buried himself in books again, hoping that the pages would shield him, that the quiet would be enough to erase the sting of betrayal. But it wasn't. Every time he tried to focus, the memory replayed. The weight of the team's mocking stares, Connor's cold indifference, the sharp emptiness of realizing that the one person who had shown him something real had chosen the crowd instead. One night, long after the halls of the dorm had gone quiet, Noah sat at his desk, a lamp spilling pale light across a textbook he hadn't turned the page of in half an hour. He wasn't reading. He was staring blankly, his mind circling the same bitter memory, when a knock startled him. Soft, hesitant, as though the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there at all. Noah froze, his heart racing in his chest. It was late. No one ever came to his room at this hour. Slowly, he stood and opened the door. Connor. But not the Connor he had seen on the court. Not the captain with the wide grin and the easy laugh. This was someone else. His shoulders were slumped, his posture stripped of confidence, his face drawn with something raw and restless. He looked younger somehow, smaller, as if the weight of his own reputation had finally pressed him down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and sharp, until Connor shifted awkwardly, dragging a hand through his hair. "I can't keep doing this," he said finally, his voice rough and unsteady. Noah stared at him, anger and disbelief colliding inside his chest. The first instinct was to laugh, bitter and sharp, to remind him of how easily he had shoved him aside, how quickly he had turned their connection into a joke for the crowd. But the sound never came, because Connor's face carried no mask now. His eyes were restless, desperate, and it unsettled Noah more than any smirk ever had. Doing what? Noah asked, his tone harsher than he meant, though he didn't regret it. Playing him, Connor muttered, jerking his head as though pointing toward some invisible version of himself. The hero of the court. The captain who never shuts up, who always has the right line, who everyone expects to laugh the loudest. I don't even know who that is anymore. Every day I put him on like a costume, and every day it gets heavier. The words tumbled out, uneven and raw, filling the room with a weight Noah hadn't expected. He swallowed hard, torn between the memory of humiliation and the sight of Connor unraveling before him. I hated myself these past weeks, Connor continued, his voice cracking at the edges. Not because of them, not because of the jokes or the whispers. Because of me, because I push you away, because I chose them over you. And the worst part, he looked up, his eyes meeting Noah's with a force that nearly broke him. It didn't even make me feel safe. It made me feel empty. Noah's chest tightened. He wanted to shout, to demand why. If Connor had felt this way all along, why had he let him stand alone under the storm of laughter? Why had he been so quick to erase everything they had shared? But the answer was already there, carved into the lines of Connor's face. Fear. Fear of losing the respect of the crowd. Fear of letting go of the image he had built his life around. Then why? Noah whispered, his voice sharp because it was controlled, because it threatened to break. Why humiliate me just to keep your mask? Connor's reply was immediate, his voice trembling but firm. Because I was scared. I thought if they saw me without it, I'd disappear. I thought if I lost their respect, I'd lose everything. But I was wrong. The only time I wasn't pretending, the only time I actually liked who I was when I was with you. The confession hit Noah like a blow, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to reach for the truth in those words. But the wound was still fresh, the betrayal still too sharp. Trust wasn't something that could be handed back so easily. And yet the look in Connor's eyes wasn't that of a king desperate to reclaim his throne. It was the look of someone stripped of all defenses, standing on the edge of collapse, begging not to fall alone. The silence between them stretched, heavy and dangerous, filled with risk and possibility. Noah said nothing, his thoughts a storm of anger, sorrow, and something he didn't want to name. He didn't know if he could forgive, didn't know if he could trust again. But one truth was undeniable. The boy standing in front of him was no longer the captain who had laughed with the crowd. He was just Connor, and he was finally telling the truth. The basketball court felt different when Connor walked back onto it. The floor was the same polished wood, the banners still hung from the rafters, and the sound of balls thudding against the ground echoed just as it always had. But the atmosphere had shifted. He no longer carried the same aura that once drew everyone in. The easy laughter that had followed him everywhere had dulled. The circle of teammates that had crowded around him had thinned. Some greeted him with hesitant smiles, but most didn't look him in the eye. Others whispered quietly, smirks twisting on their faces, waiting for him to try to reclaim his old throne. But Connor didn't. For the first time in years, he walked onto the court without the mask. The noise of the gym was still there, but it no longer dictated who he had to be. He didn't throw out jokes to fill the silence, didn't grin just to hide the heaviness pressing at his chest. He felt the stares, sharp and judging, and though each one stung, there was also relief. The false laughter, the hollow admiration, it was gone. And in its absence, he could finally breathe. The mask was gone, and though the air felt raw against his face, it was real. Across the gym, Noah stepped through the door. It was the first time he had returned since that day, the first time he dared face the court again. His stomach tightened at the sight of the players, at the memory of the mocking laughter that had once suffocated him. The whispers hadn't disappeared. He could hear them even now, fragments of conversation, quick glances thrown in his direction, the same cruel amusement that had haunted him for weeks. But this time, he didn't bow his head. He walked forward, steady, the ball clutched in his hands not as a shield, but as a choice. Connor noticed him immediately. Their eyes met across the court, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow, the chaos fading until it was just the two of them. There was no smirk on Connor's face, no arrogant grin, just a quiet acknowledgement, heavy with everything unsaid. Noah hesitated, his chest tight with the memory of betrayal, but then he moved to the free throw line, bouncing the ball against the floor with deliberate calm. The others watched, their whispers growing louder, their stares sharper. Connor ignored them. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside Noah, not as captain and rookie, not as leader and outcast, but as equals. Together they began to move, passing the ball back and forth, working through drills in unspoken rhythm. Each bounce of the ball seemed to echo louder than the whispers, each shot at the hoop a defiance in itself. At first, the laughter circled again, sharper now, desperate to drag them down. A few players snickered openly, their voices pitched just high enough to carry. Someone muttered something cruel under their breath, and another clapped mockingly when Noah missed a shot. But neither of them flinched. Connor didn't rise to defend himself with a joke, and Noah didn't retreat into silence. They simply kept going, steady, relentless, refusing to bend under the weight of ridicule. The court, once a place of humiliation, began to feel different. With each movement, with each refusal to break, they carved out a space that was theirs. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, stubborn, undeniable. The whispers lost some of their power. The cruel smirks faltered when there was no reaction to feed on. And slowly, the jeers turned into silence, then into something else entirely. Respect. Not from everyone, not immediately, but from those who could see that strength wasn't in the noise, but in the refusal to be broken. Connor's so-called friends, the ones who had once cheered his loudest jokes, drifted away. Their absence hurt, but it was also liberating. He no longer needed to burn himself down to keep their approval. The weight of pretending had lifted, replaced by something quieter but stronger. For the first time, he trained not to impress, but because he wanted to. Noah, too, felt the change within himself. The court had once been a battlefield where he stood alone under the weight of mockery. Now, even under the same harsh lights and sharp stares, he felt steady. The betrayal had scarred him, but it had also revealed a strength he hadn't known he carried. His silence was no longer a shield to hide behind. It was an anchor, a power that steadied him against the storm. Together they moved through practice, side by side, their differences still clear. Connor restless and fiery, Noah calm and deliberate. But instead of clashing, those differences balanced, shaping a rhythm that no mockery could erase. The others still whispered, still judged, still smirked, but it no longer mattered. Because on that court, beneath the sharp lights and the weight of every watching eye, they had found something stronger than laughter or fear. They had found freedom. The freedom to stand as themselves, without masks, without apologies. The freedom to prove that true strength was not in being adored by the crowd, but in daring to be real when the world demanded you pretend. And as the final whistle blew, the sound cutting through the heavy air, Noah and Connor stood together, unbroken, their quiet defiance louder than any roar.